fine folks over at Line 6 have just released their new software plugin suite, Metallurgy. Now you might ask what Metallurgy is. What Metallurgy is a collection of 3 apps which can work either standalone or as a plugin within a DAW, and they can be purchased individually or as a bundle. Now what does each app contain? Well, each app is going to contain 4 amplifier models. It's going to contain a newly designed cab room or cabinet room with some really great features and some new cabs. It also has the ability to work with third-party impulse responses. It's going to have some pre-amplifier effects and some post-amplifier effects, as well as some other bells and whistles. In this video, I'm going to take you through the interface of one of the versions of the plugin. We're going to look at the modern version. The other ones are called Doom and Thrash. The reason I'm only going to look at one is the interface for all are going to be the same. Once we know how to use one, we will know how to use the other. So there's no point in looking at all today. We're not going to look at any tones in this video, but right after this in part 2, I'm going to have another set of videos that's going to go through the tones and the features of each one on their own. But I thought it would be good first if we just learn how to use it, what all the features are in there, all the little bells and whistles. Then we can dive in and listen to some of the amazing tones we can get out of this. So let's head over and take a look and see what we have. So here we are over in Metallurgy, and here's the little plugin. I'm using it within Cubase, and we're going to just work our way from top down to bottom and cover all of the features that are built into this, because at first glance, there's a lot going on. So what you'll notice here is because I'm in Cubase, this whole top strip up here is just Cubase specific. That's not part of the Standalone app. The Standalone app does have a couple things we're going to go look at afterwards, but let's just start with the plugin. So first and foremost, up at the top here, we have our toolbar controls. You're going to see over here on the top left, we have the Line 6 logo and tells us which version of the plugin we're using. We're using modern. As I mentioned before, we also have a Doom and a Thrash, which we'll look at in further videos. Coming up next, we have the preset browser. So when we click this, you'll notice we have a whole bunch of factory presets that come along with this, and we can pick and choose whichever ones we want from there. We can scroll through the different ones that we have. If we click our little hamburger button here, we have the ability to save, save as, rename, and open other presets. Moving on, we also have an A/B comparison button. This is a really cool feature. So you'll notice right now we are on A. It's highlighted in white. And I can, let's say, have a sound here, and by hitting my arrow, I can copy those settings to B. You'll notice it flashes. Now when I go to B, I could come over here and say, what if I want to hear that with a little more drive and a little more bass? I can easily now flip back and forth between those for comparison purposes. If I'm happy with what I did in B, I could transfer that back over to A to have that as my main tone and then keep working from there, you know, maybe tweaking things between A and B. So very, very handy feature. And we could even use it if we change amps, copy that over there, you know, and then come back over to A and change back. And it would even change between the amps. So really cool then the way we can A/B different tones. We have an undo and a redo button, pretty self-explanatory, I think. You know, if I crank my treble up and decide I just want to revert back to what I had or go back and forth between those, I can use my undo and redo. We have a fabulous tuner in all models that can either mute the signal or not mute the signal. That's up to us. And we can use it in needle mode or strobe mode. Both work really nicely. I'm really happy with this in my testing of the product. Metallurgy is also full MIDI compatible, and we can control it via MIDI. So depending on the MIDI controller we have a MIDI learn function here, and we can choose what parameter we want to control and send it a message from our MIDI controller. Really fabulous stuff. I'm going to do a video on that in the very near future to figure out how we can get full MIDI control of this. Then we move on to our account button here, where we can manage our account, deauthorize the computer, sign out and sign into our account. We move on to the help button where it tells us about metallurgy. It gives us online help if we need it. We also have a pilot's guide and we can check for updates. The far right settings control brings up our preferences. And you'll notice the first thing is metallurgy can work with third-party impulse responses. So very nice feature. This here is telling us the library path for where we would put our third-party impulse responses so that we would then be able to load them into metallurgy. We also have some preferences for the tuner. We can always start the tuner muted, or maybe we want to start it and still be able to hear our signal. That'll be up to us. We can decide whether we want to start it in needle mode or strobe mode when it starts up, and we can also pick the reference frequency, standard being 440 hertz. Now down here it says under miscellaneous, utility drawer is open by default. Now I have that off, and for good reason. We're going to get to the utility drawer in just a moment. We'll keep that off for now. Moving on down to this next toolbar below, the main toolbar, we have our in-out controls, meters, and view selectors. So we have an input control. Now this is kind of interesting. We would probably mostly leave that at 0. Metallurgy is going to want to receive an instrument level input. So we would set our audio interface to instrument level. Now, if we have a guitar that had really high output pickups and maybe we didn't have an input pad on our audio interface, we could use this to dial it back so it doesn't clip and give too hot a signal. The input meter has a nice little feature down here where it has a little kind of gray area between -36 and -12, telling us that's kind of the range of signal strength that metallurgy wants to see. So that's kind of a handy feature to have. Now, one other nice feature is, if you notice, I brought the input down to 6.3, and instead of trying to, perfectly get it back to 0, if we simply hold the Alt key down and click, it'll take all of our settings back to their default position. So if I come down even to my drive control on my amp, you'll notice they go and get centered off again very easily. So that's a nice feature. The next part of this toolbar is our view feature, which is going to take us to either our pre-amplifier effects, to our amplifier section, to our cab section, which we're going to discuss all more in a moment, and to our post-amplifier effects as well. We can actually engage entire sections on and off, possibly to save DSP. If they're on, we can also engage or disengage each particular effect as well. We can choose from different amplifiers and so on and so forth. Moving on, we have our output meters and a final output control where we can basically decide how loud we want our entire preset. This would be kind of the last thing coming out of the plugin, so that would be a good place to be able to balance our sounds. Rather than putting more or less input, which is going to hit the front of the amp more or less and affect the tone, the output, on the other hand, will not. We could boost it or cut it here and not affect our final tone. Now, one other thing that I had mentioned before, and if you see this little arrow button right here, if we pull this down, that gives us our utility drawer. And you'll notice here that it has a bunch of other kind of hidden features. Now, we can choose to have the utility drawer open by default. We'll just leave that on for now so that when we open it up, it's always there, so we're not looking for it. What features this adds is the ability to have a capo that we can either move up or down by 5 semitones. So if we wanted to tune half step down, we don't actually have to do it. We can just drop this down by 1. We have 2 settings, fast or stable. Fast is going to track much faster if we're playing quickly. Stable is going to give us potentially less artifacts in the sound when we're using this. It's going to be up to us to experiment with that and see what the best setting is for our purposes. If you aren't using it, I would suggest to just keep that turned off. We are also going to have some really great noise reduction, which we can have in the signal chain or not. We're going to have our threshold where it's going to decide when that actually kicks in, at the point we want it to kick in. And we'd probably want to avoid too high a threshold where it may be cutting in and out at times we don't want it to. We'll also have a decay where it's going to tell us that after it goes past that threshold, how long before the noise reduction stays open and starts clamping down on the sound. And we also have a dynamic low pass filter. And basically this low pass filter dynamically gates the high end of your signal. So you adjust the knob up if you want a little bit more of that and less if you want less of it. So a very nice section to have included. We also have this focus filter, or as mentioned in the manual, called the anti-flub control. And what this basically is an adjustable preamp positioned high pass filter that cuts 12 dB per octave. So if we find that things are a little boomy and flubby on the bottom, we can roll this up and it's going to help us to control that, but done before the amplifier. So another really great feature. All right, so moving down to the main part of the plugin, we start with our pre-amplifier effects. Now, for each different version of the plugin, Modern, Thrash, or Doom, we're going to have a different selection of pre and post effects. So we can see in Modern, we have the Rochester comp, we have the Minotaur overdrive pedal, and we have the caliper drive. We have post effects, which are the mod chorus echo, and very similar to Helix and Helix Native, except that we're using actual knobs now to control the different parameters. That's beyond the scope of this video. I'm not going to be discussing the actual parameters or dialing these in any way, but just more showcasing what we do have. So we have all these controls. Nice when we hover over it, it gives us the value up top. Very, very handy. Now we go to our amp section. We have a choice, as I mentioned, of 4 amps. We have the Archetype, the Rev Gen, the Vitriol, and the Badonk. And I gotta say, beautiful, beautiful graphical user interface. The graphics are very nicely done, I find. It's a very attractive plugin and very easy to use. Nice movement on all the controls and easy to maneuver, and lots of possibilities. We move to the new cab section, which is what I am very excited about. So starting from the left, we have our cabinet here with the graphical representation of 2 microphones. And if we hover over them, we get different values right now of where everything is positioned. And you'll notice one of the greatest features is movable mics on and off axis. Super exciting and something that a lot of folks using Line 6 products have been asking for a long time, and it's finally here. We can choose also from 8 different cabs in each plugin. We have something in here, the Mandarin V30, the Moon T75, Cali V30, Brit V30. Those are 4x12s. The Mandarin's a 212, and you see all the other ones here. We can just choose whichever cab we desire, and really nice stuff. Again, very easy to use with the whole graphical user interface the way it is. Then each of these microphones has its own channel strip where we can actually choose the mic. Let's say I wanted a dynamic 421 instead of the mic that was up there, and maybe a ribbon R121, a Royer R121. We can then balance the volume. We can solo or mute each channel. We can pan them in the stereo field. We can also default them back by hitting Alt and clicking. We have a phase flip button, and we can also change the angle of the mics to 45 degrees. All really handy things to have at our disposal. We can also switch from mic to IR, and you'll notice that I can then load up my impulse response that's going to be stored in the folder we learned about over here in our settings. So really handy to be able to use third-party IRs. As we move to the right, we also have a single microphone that's going to be a room mic, which is a real handy feature to add some room sound to the overall tone. Again, we can pan that in the stereo field. We can solo or mute it, depending on if we want it in or not. We can put a low cut filter on it, and we can also set the damping of the reverberation and either set it at 8 kilohertz or 3.7 kilohertz. Fabulous, fabulous addition to our cab section. And then we have a final output of our actual cab block, which will then feed into the post effects. We also have this kind of global EQ setting over here that we can pop in and out. If we have that in, we have the ability to have a high frequency EQ set either as a bell or a shelf EQ. Again, we can zero those off to default settings. The range on this is from 1.8 kilohertz all the way up to 18 kilohertz, whether it's on bell or shelf. We have a mid-range frequency that we can set from either 400 hertz all the way up to 4 kilohertz, a low mid, which goes from 100 hertz up to 1 kilohertz, a low, which goes from 20 hertz to 200 hertz that can also be set as either a bell or a shelf EQ. We also have high pass filters and low pass filters we can put in if we so desire. And like I said, we can zero these all off very easy by holding the Alt key, getting them back to their normal position. And we can engage that or disengage the entire EQ block at the end. If we don't want to use it, we don't need to. Now, moving on over to the standalone version, I just wanted to show you one thing that you're going to see that's different here. We have this section right here where it says tap. Now, if we come over to the file menu, which obviously wasn't on the plugin version. I pull that down. We see we have preferences. So if we open that up, this gives us the ability now to control our audio device. We can choose our audio device, whichever one we want to use. We can choose our input channel and our output channels, set the sample rate, and set the buffer size. And it gives us a reported round trip latency that we're getting. We can also set our MIDI device when we want to control Metallurgy with a MIDI device. So that's going to be very handy. And we can also choose where we get our tempo from for maybe having our delays locked into a certain tempo. We can get it from the particular preset we're using right now, or we can choose to have it from another application. And we could even type that in there to see it come over here. But now when we have it set like that, we're not going to be able to do any tap tempo from right within the plugin. So if we come back over here and set it to preset, post effects, now if I come and I tap this, you'll see it gives me my tap tempo, and we can set that or by typing it in. So really, really handy thing to have in our standalone version. So there you have it, a quick overview of all of the features that we're going to have in each version of the Metallurgy plugins or apps. Now I'm sure you guys want to hear this. Go check out the next part in this series, which is going to be taking a look at the modern version of the app that we just looked at, but we're going to take a listen to how these things sound, take a look at that cab room, and see how these amps are working. I think you guys are going to be impressed. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was a helpful first look into what we're dealing with this new fabulous set of plugins that we're receiving from the folks at Line 6. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. And now you can go check the next part in this series, which is available now, so that you can dive in a little further and hear some of the tones from this set of new plugins. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you really soon.